Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, this is going to be a slightly different video from the sort of thing I usually put out. Because as regulars to this channel will know, I love showing you pieces of gear that I think are just absolutely fantastic. But whenever I'm presenting a piece of gear, I try not to put too many of my own personal opinions into that presentation. If I love the piece of gear, I will tell you, and if something is slightly bugging me about it, I'll tell you that too. But overall, I prefer to, and I appreciate this is the cliche to end all cliches, let the gear do the talking. I just make a load of noise with the thing and then ask you guys in the comment section whether or not you like it. So I try not to talk about myself on this channel too much, is what I'm trying to say. But there's a question that keeps coming up time and time again, usually in the end of month Q&A videos. And it's often words to the effect of, Joe, what's your favourite guitar and why? Or, Joe, can you show us your top 3 favourite guitars from your collection? Things like that. So, seeing as it's weirdly been requested so often, today I'm going to do just that. Now, this video started life as being my top 3 favourite guitars, then it became the top 5, and because I couldn't decide between the 5th, it became the top 6. Because I love all of my guitars, and if I buy a guitar and mod it and I still don't really bond with a thing, I'll tend to sell it on and roll the dice and buy something else. I don't see the point in holding on to gear that you don't absolutely love. So choosing between them has been very difficult. But today I'm going to show you the 6 guitars in my collection that I just tend to gravitate towards more than any others, and I think sound brilliant, and I just absolutely love them, and tell you a little bit of the story behind how I came to own them and the current specifications. Now, what I'm going to do in this video, as well as talk about the guitars, is build a massive amp rig behind me. So I'm going to use my Vajra JTM45 clone, which is my favourite amplifier I've ever played, into a 2x12 cabinet loaded with AlNiCo speakers, and also the Dr. Z Master with its 3 10-inch AlNiCo speakers. And I'm going to absolutely crank them. So they're going to be brutally loud here in the room today and really quite distorted. But what that will hopefully also show is how the different guitars push different frequencies, and other guitars will give the amps a much hotter signal and create more overdrive. So you'll hopefully hear the fundamental differences between the guitars and why I really like them, albeit through 2 absolutely belting amplifiers. So without further ado folks, let's dive right in. Okay, so guitar number 1, and I should say this is in no particular order today. The first guitar up, at least, is this one here. This is my Kirn Barnbuster. Now, I bought this last summer from a chap down in Dorset, I think it was, but this was originally made back in 2009. Now, Kirn is based in, I think it's Orlando in Florida in the States, and he's one of those boutique builders that just knows Telecasters and how to build the perfect T-style instrument. And the most interesting thing about this guitar is the bodywood, because this is pine. Now, I believe I'm right in saying the 1949 prototype of the Broadcaster, which became the Nocaster, which became the Telecaster, was made of pine. And then Leo changed from using it, some say because he didn't like the grain pattern, others say because it dinged too easily, and that's when Tellies became known with ash bodies. But this is pine. And it's actually made of reclaimed timber. Now, this wood here was taken from a factory, like the beams in an old factory, that was built in the 1800s. So this particular pine is about 200 years old. And there's various theories as to why older woods sound better, or at least different from modern woods, all about resins and drying out, all that sort of stuff. And it's the reasons why people say vintage guitars sound at least different to modern production guitars. But all I can say is this guitar just sounds wonderful. Now, it has a Glendale bridge, which is one of the most vintage correct ashtray style bridges you can get. And these pickups are the Don Mayer Hot Baker Lights. And a little bit like Ron Kirn, Don Mayer just knows how to wind telly pickups. And I was very lucky to get these. I think Don is winding down production now. He's, you know, a good age. But these pickups in this guitar just sound phenomenal, and it's just one of my favourite instruments that I own. This is a guitar that just sounds great into whatever you put it into. Okay, so next up is this. This is a Heritage 535 from 2011. And before we get into it, let's go all Spinal Tap, because look at the flame on that. It's one of those tops that always looks stunning, but in the right light it just erupts into this tiger-like pattern. This is definitely the best looking guitar in my collection, no doubt about that. Now, I've made videos about this instrument before, but if you know anything about the Heritage as a brand, basically back in, I think, the 1980s, Gibson decided to close their old Kalamazoo plant, 225 Parson Street, and move their entire operations down to Nashville. But there was a group of, I think, 4 or 5 luthiers who didn't want to move to Nashville because their entire lives and families are in Kalamazoo. So they clubbed together and bought the factory and all the old guitar making machinery from Gibson, and had something of a gentleman's agreement with them that they could carry on building Gibson style guitars under the Heritage brand name, but using the original machines and handcrafting methods. Now, I have heard that in recent years the Heritage has been bought out by a much bigger company. They're now using CNC machines. If that is the case, it's pretty sad, because this was made in the golden era of the Heritage, when those original luthiers were still there, hand making every instrument. And there are things about this guitar that aren't perfect. The way the binding has been scraped down the neck, it's a little bit wobbly, but to me that shows it's been done by hand, by human beings who have learnt their craft over many, many decades. And back in 2011, the chap who bursted the original 1950s Les Pauls was still with the Heritage, bursting guitars at 225 Parson Street. So this guitar was made at a time, and I can't say for sure, but this might have been bursted by the same guy who did the old Les Pauls. So I just love everything that the Heritage stood for back in those days, at least. Hand making amazing guitars the old-fashioned way. Now, these pickups are the throwback PG102s. I have corrected the neck magnet flip. I'm not really a fan of the Peter Green out phase thing, but these are also wound with new old stock original 1950s wire. So they're kind of as authentic Parson Street as you can possibly get. They're wound on the old winding machines that Gibson used back in the 50s. If you know anything about throwback, you'll have heard all about that. And I use Faber hardware, as I do on all my Gibson guitars. I use the 50s wiring method with VI pots, as I do on all my Gibson style guitars at least. And this is just one of my all-time favourite instruments. This is definitely a lifer instrument for me. And if I had to pick one guitar for my entire collection to play solely for the rest of my life, I think this would definitely be in the top 2. Right, so next up is a guitar with a bit of a story behind it. I've told this story in full in a separate video. I'll summarise it today quite quickly for you. But this here is not a genuine Fender Strat, it's a Partscaster. And this is one of the only guitars that I've ever been able to buy in person from a high street guitar shop, because being left-handed, I tend to have to buy most of my instruments online. The stock just isn't there in high street shops. But back in 2012, I was on Denmark Street in London, and I walked into Regent Sounds, and this was hanging up on the wall. And back then it was really white. It's properly yellowed in the years since. But all I knew about this guitar back then was it had been put together by someone who worked on Denmark Street. That's all I knew. Anyway, a couple of years ago, I was doing some work for Fane speakers, and Fane put the video I made out to all their dealers and people who use their products. And a chap messaged me on Facebook saying, "Love the Fane video. By the way, are you playing my old guitar?" And it was basically a chap called Andre who runs Highlight Amplification. And since then, I've demoed a lot of Highlight gear on this channel because of that particular link. But he was the one who put this guitar together back in 2012. So last time I saw Andre, I took this guitar along to sort of present to him and sort of say, "Do you remember this?" And he told me a few more things about it. So this is a Japanese Fender neck on an American Strat body. And it was lacquered firstly with a poly coat and then with a nitrocellulose coat by a chap, and I won't be able to pronounce this properly, Philippe Debrel, or Debris, a French luthier who works on Denmark Street, and he's worked on a lot of very famous instruments. I think he restored Noel Gallagher's old 335 that Liam smashed in the last ever Oasis gig fairly recently. So a very well-known chap. He was the one that actually finished this. And back then it had Lundgren pickups in it. I've swapped them out for these Mark Foley 60s pre-CBS pickups, my favourite Strat pickups I've ever played. It also had a blackguard on it, it's now white. And it's just one of those guitars that sounds fantastic. It's my only Strat. I'm not really a Strat guy, but I love this particular Strat. I've played others that I just didn't bond with at all, but this one is just something special. And I just love the story behind it, and the fact that it led to knowing Andre and demoing his gear and all that sort of stuff, and the fact I bought it in person on Denmark Street in London. It's a guitar that really means something to me. So yeah, it's just a really fabulous sounding 60s voiced Strat. Now, this is a guitar that many of you will be very familiar with. This here is my 1992 Gibson Les Paul Standard, which is the so-called Goodwood era of Gibson Les Pauls. And after the bursts of the 1950s, this is one of the most sought-after eras of Les Paul. Whatever they were doing with the woods back then, it just created amazing sounding instruments, and this is absolutely no exception. It's been through many different pickups and electronics changes over the years, and whatever I do to it, it just sounds wonderful. You know, you get those guitars where you're forever chasing a tone in your head and you never quite get there? Whatever I do to this, it just works. It's a great, great sounding lump of wood. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the band The Darkness. And Dan, one of my all-time favourite rhythm guitarists, plays a Honeyburst Les Paul. And back in 2012, I think it was, this showed up on eBay, and I used Twitter back then, and I tweeted the link to the eBay listing to Dan, just saying, "What do you think of this?" And he actually replied saying, "It's a fair price, it looks brilliant, you should buy that guitar." So at that point, I didn't really feel like I had any choice, I just had to get it. And I'm so glad that I did. Now, currently this has the throwback SLE 101 PAFs in, so it's kind of going after the 58 burst type thing with AlNiCo 2 magnets, but I'm forever trying different pickups in this guitar. It had the Wiz Premium clone PAFs in until last week, so I love experimenting with this guitar, but whatever I give it, it just works and sounds like a really hot classic Les Paul. Okay, so this next guitar is a bit of a curveball. Regulars to this channel will know that I don't tend to stray too far from the classic designs of the 1950s and 60s. This guitar is none of those things, but I took a punt on it and I'm very glad that I did. This here is a Gronlund R16 Redeemer Jr. Now, Gronlund is a single luthier called James Green, based in the States. I want to say Boston, I could be wrong on that. And I think to date he's still only built just over 100 guitars, but the quality of this thing is just absolutely outstanding. Now, this showed up on a guitar shop website here in the UK, and what I really liked about it is it's clearly not a Telecaster inspired guitar or a Les Paul. It's very much its own thing. But it still doesn't look overly weird. It has a kind of classic aesthetic about it that looks and feels familiar, even though it isn't a classic guitar. And I couldn't afford the guitar at the time, but I kept going back to this page, and eventually the shop dropped the price quite significantly. I guess they just couldn't sell the thing. So I leapt on it, and I'm so glad that I did. It's one of those very strange things. Some boutique brands, the better known ones like Novo or Nick Huber, someone like that, they hold their price massively. But for lesser known boutique brands, especially when it's in a different country than where it was built, and they're just not very well known, the resale price seems to be through the floor. My Bailey Curve Special, I think that would have cost the original owner £2,000 here in the UK, and resale here in the UK, I got that guitar for less than 400. So you can get some stunning quality boutique instruments for not very much money, and this is one of those. Now, it has I think it's a black walnut body, and the bird's eye maple neck. The figuring is just insane when you look at it up close. And this metal pickguard, I love that you can see where my fingers have been. I could polish it up and make it super shiny again, but I really like that you can see it's been played. Now, this switch was originally like the switch on like an old Fender Esquire. So in the middle it was volume and tone, down disconnected the tone pot so it was a slightly brighter sound, and up it wasn't the dark circuit, it was like a fixed tone capacitor for a kind of honky cocktoir thing. I've disconnected the switch, I never used it, and I think it added a bit of static noise into the guitar, and that's now gone, getting rid of that. And this pickup here, I've replaced the original Filtertron it came with a TV Jones Ray Butts full fidelity Filtertron. Very low output, very bright, very chimey. So today into the gainy amps, I'm going to wind the tone control down just a little bit to take the edge off it, because into a gainy amp it can get a little bit abrasive. And you would think that a low output Filtertron might not sound good in classic rock land, but let's not forget that Malcolm Young pretty much conquered the world with a vintage Filtertron, and it really growls when you want it to. So I'm so glad that I grabbed this guitar. It's a bit of an oddball, but I just absolutely love this thing. So this was going to be where this video ended, but I couldn't not include this guitar here. So this started life as a 1996 Japanese-made Fender Tele 52 reissue. And you'll have seen this guitar loads on the channel over the years in its stock form. It was my workhorse Tele. But then I got the Kirn Barnbuster, and it kind of showed this guitar what a Tele should be. So I was just playing the Barnbuster all the time and wasn't really touching this guitar. And I didn't want to get rid of it because I put a lot of miles on it. All the lacquer's kind of darkened around the bridge. It looks a bit grim. So I wasn't going to get any money for it if I tried to sell it. So I didn't want it to just gather dust, and I took it to Matt at Monty's Guitars in Cheltenham. And as you can see, he's heavily customized it. I made a full feature of him doing the work on this guitar. I'll link to that up there now. But as you can see, he made a custom pick guard, he chopped down the Callahan bridge, he refretted it, but he also included his wide range humbuckers, which are 1970s style pickups. They're a bit later than the era I typically go for, but these just have a roar to them that just sounds absolutely guttural. Really are sort of punishing pickups when you put them into gainy amps. And I just love the journey that I've been on with this instrument, and the fact that Matt was able to take a fairly plain guitar and turn it into something very, very special. And it's clearly its own thing. It's clearly been customized. But my favorite feature that Matt put on this guitar is this curve in the pick guard here, because until this point, it's kind of 52 shaped. But this is the point where it transitions into being its own thing. It's kind of become known as the FiftyLuxe because it's a 52 and a Fender Deluxe with the wide ranges mashed together. And I just love that nobody else in the world has a guitar like this. It's my guitar, and it's just something that I can enjoy, that Matt put so much time and effort into to turn into just a wonderful, wonderful instrument. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath, let me know which of the guitars today was your favourite and why. I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks down in the comment section. Now my first observation from having shot this video today is bloody hell that was loud. Two 30-watt amplifiers that they weren't quite dimed, but they were both pretty much flat out, punching me in the back of the head. It is absolutely brutal sitting in front of a wall of amplifiers like that. But hopefully you did hear the fundamental similarities and differences between the guitars today. And in Pro Tools, I'm going to leave the mic balance exactly the same for each of the excerpts, and the amps were set exactly the same throughout the video. So you'll hear the fundamental similarities and differences between the instruments today coming through your speakers. But as always, folks, all of this is just my opinion, so please do let me know yours underneath. I love chatting with you guys about all this sort of stuff. So thank you ever so much for watching. I hope this video was interesting and useful in some way. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it makes a big, big difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.